It started like any ordinary morning, sunlight spilling through the windows, a quiet cup of coffee in Donnie McClurkin's hands, and silence filling the room. But behind that stillness was something heavier, something that couldn't be ignored. A storm was brewing, not outside, but deep within. Because on this day, Donnie wasn't just reflecting on life, he was preparing to say something he had held in for far too long. What followed would send shockwaves through the gospel world. A confession, a reckoning, a truth that had been buried under years of silence, fame, and faith. Today, we're peeling back the calm to reveal what really happened behind that quiet moment and why the world is now listening to Donnie McClurkin like never before. Donnie McClurkin had been unusually quiet in the days following his 65th birthday. The celebrations were full of joy, laughter, and heartfelt tributes. But deep inside, a silent weight pressed against his spirit. Surrounded by framed photos capturing a lifetime of highs and lows, from sold-out concerts and quiet dinners to ministry moments and his son's smile, Donnie felt the weight of time. These weren't just pictures, they were proof of a man who had survived trauma, conquered illness, touched millions through music, and still bore unseen scars that never made the stage. But on this day, something had shifted. He leaned back on his couch, Bible open beside him, its pages fragile from years of prayers and tears. There was no fear in his heart, only a deep urgency. Life had become a mirror, reflecting not just the glory of what had been, but the questions of what remained. Who still needed to hear his truth? What legacy would he leave behind? And why, despite everything he had overcome, did his soul feel like it was standing at a crossroads once again? There was a lot to be thankful for, but there was also a lot that still caused deep-seated pain. Even the toughest soldiers had occasionally needed to take a seat and collect their thoughts, because the journey hadn't been easy. A quiet prayer came out of his mouth as he briefly closed his eyes. "Thank you, Lord, for keeping me. Thank you for everything. However, please show me what I need to see and what this sensation is." Like a kid reaching out in the dark, the prayer was whispered in hushed desperation rather than shouted. Although Donnie was unaware of it at the time, the answer to that request was on the horizon and would completely upend him. The morning calm didn't last long. Donnie's phone rang as he went for his Bible and set his coffee cup on the side table. The ringtone reverberated across the silent room, faint but insistent. As soon as he looked at the screen, he saw the caller ID. Erica, his niece, was there. Unless there was a problem, she rarely called this early. A beat skipped through his chest. "Hello," he said in a cool yet inquisitive tone. For a minute, the other end was silent. Then there was the sound of a heavy breathing person struggling to contain their tears. Donnie sat upright at once. "Uncle Donnie." At last, Erica's voice cracked, shaky. "I'm at a loss for words. I'm not sure how to put this." His chest grew constricted. "What's happening? Tell me what took place." Another pause. Then he heard the words that pierced his heart like a knife. "Charlene is to blame. She is no longer there. Early this morning, she died." Donnie felt as though everything froze. He blinked as he tried to make sense of what he had just heard. "Lost?" he muttered. "No. What do you mean by gone?" "A heart attack struck her. I'm crying now," Erica remarked. "She did not survive the hospital's attempts to resuscitate her. Uncle Donnie, she's truly gone." Donnie was unable to talk. He firmly grasped the couch's armrest, as though he was clinging to anything to keep his world from spinning. His thoughts immediately returned to the last time he had spoken to Charlene, only a few days prior. She had sounded so lively, joking about old times and urging him to get more sleep and look after himself. More than his older sister, she had always been. She was his dearest friend, his second mother, and his guardian. His eyes filled with tears, and he muttered her name to himself. "Charlene, oh God, no." Erica continued to speak, but Donnie was unable to hear much of her explanation of what had transpired. His own heartbeat got louder in his ears, drowning out her voice. An unprepared flood of sadness that threatened to split him in two started to rise within of him. Holding the phone to his chest, he gently got up and moved in the direction of the window. Outside, everything appeared the same, serene, bright, and motionless. However, everything had altered inside his heart. The light had just gone out of his universe. Donnie felt like a lost boy once more for the first time in a long time, hurt, shaken, and looking for answers that would never come. There was a profound silence as Donnie stood at the window with his phone still close to his breast. The sort that comes after destruction, not the kind that is calm, Unable to bear the weight of the news, he slowly dropped to the floor as his knees started to shake beneath him. Slowly at first, then in torrents, the tears began to pour. He wasn't only in tears. In a way that words could never adequately describe, he was grieving, bursting from the inside. Why her God? Through his tears, he whispered, "Why now?" His mind returned to their previous encounter. As usual, she had brought over his favorite sweet potato pie. She joked that he should slow down and settle down. It was only a few days ago. Her laugh, that warm, unflinching laugh that always made everything feel fine, was still audible to him. However, that sound was vanished, and he was unable to bid farewell. Donnie grabbed a photo album from nearby and took out a backstage photo of the two of them from a previous performance. As like she knew he was meant for something more than his suffering, she put her arm around him and grinned proudly. Donnie's shoulders trembled with sorrow as she held the picture. The crushing weight of loss was there. His thoughts strayed to times he had forgotten. She would call him baby brother during late-night conversations, and her voice would sing hymns in the kitchen. She had always been there, a beacon of light through every storm, no matter how gloomy. That brightness was gone now. Normally, the house was filled with prayer and gospel music, but tonight it was quiet. Hugging that picture and sobbing like a child, Donnie sat on the floor of the living room. Everything that he had stood for, including his faith and his strength as a pastor, seemed far away now. He was merely a broken guy in this moment, lamenting the one person who had kept him together throughout his life. However, he felt deep down that Charlene would prefer that he stand. She would want him to preach and sing once again. Not today, though. He gave himself permission to collapse today. Even the strongest individuals need to grieve, so today he allowed himself to cry. The news of Charlene's unexpected death had subtly started to spread by the following morning. Word quickly spread, first among close family members, then through religious circles, and finally on social media, even though Donnie hadn't yet made any public statements. With someone like Donnie McClurkin involved, it was impossible to conceal such a loss for very long. Individuals started sharing heartbreaking, perplexing, and kind messages. "I'm now praying for Pastor Donnie." One Facebook user commented, "He's helped so many of us get through our darkest times, and I can't imagine the pain he's feeling." Another said, "Now it's our turn to lift him up." Fans, church leaders, and gospel singers from all around the world started sharing old photos of Donnie and Charlene on Twitter, along with lengthy remarks discussing the influence she had on him and in her own quiet, potent way. Some even prayer chains were created in churches around the nation, and pastors interrupted their own services to lead intercessory prayers for Donnie and his family. They recalled moments when Charlene, always full of wisdom and a motherly warmth that people never forgot, would speak alongside Donnie at church events. Even people who had never met Charlene in person started to share videos of him preaching about loss, worshiping through pain, and singing songs that had a deeper meaning. His words, which had previously been used to console others, were now being repeated back to him as a kind of spiritual support. Her story, or just her role in Donnie's life, reminded them of their own losses, their own mothers, friends, or sisters. Donnie's followers kept his name uplifted during his absence, posting Instagram stories with the phrase, "Cover him, Lord," as a result of the common sadness that brought people together in a wave of compassion. To the McClurkin family, peace. For decades, he has poured himself into us. Now we pour into him. Donnie's silence was palpable to the world. There were no fresh posts, no public declarations, no words, just silence. At his church in Long Island, people started leaving flowers outside, and some stood in silent prayer outside the doors, knowing that he wasn't alone, despite the fact that there was no service that day. They weren't there to be seen, they were there out of love, and in that silence, everyone knew that the pain was real. Because of love, a profound spiritual human love from people whose lives he had touched and who now stood in the gap for him. Donnie's name went viral online for hours. As the prayers erupted around the globe, it became evident that, despite Donnie's brokenness at the time, he was not forgotten and was now being carried. Preaching, singing, and praying for others had always been Donnie's strength. Days went by, but for Donnie McClurkin, time had slowed down. The house felt quieter than ever, and the phone calls from family members continued. This was due to the love of those who believed in him, not his voice or his preaching. It was more than a calling, it was the beat of his life. However, After Charlene passed away, he was unable to hold a microphone. His hands would shake whenever he attempted to compose a sermon, and when he sat at the piano to sing, his voice broke before the first note. Something had changed within him. Something sacred had been shattered. After much prayer and consultation with those closest to him, Donnie released a straightforward but heartfelt message to his congregation and supporters. This was the first time in decades that he felt the need to take a step back. Not out of weakness, but out of honesty. He needed time to breathe, grieve, and feel the pain without hurrying past it for the sake of appearance. "My heart is heavy with a sorrow I've never known before. Family," it said. "I lost a person who helped mold me and supported me through all of my hardships. I'm choosing to sit with God, be silent, grieve, and listen during this time. For a while, I'm stepping away from both music and ministry. This is only a necessary respite, not the end. I need time to recover. I appreciate your love, understanding, and prayers, not just with words, but with newfound vigor. I'll be back, Donnie." The word got out fast. Support was shown by supporters and other ministers instead of disappointment. Given how uncommon it was for someone in his position to display such sensitivity, they appreciated his choice. It served as a reminder that everyone needs to be held occasionally, even spiritual giants. His plea was granted by his church. To fill in, guest pastors were asked. Even though choirs still led worship, there was always a quiet spot during each service where someone would offer up a prayer specifically for him. Donnie leaned into seclusion at home. He kept his phone on mute most of the time, stayed out of the spotlight, and didn't check his emails. He spent time in the Bible to soothe his spirit rather than to prepare sermons. At times, he would sit quietly for hours on end, allowing memories to pass and tears to fall when they were due. Even the strongest souls were humbled by the experience of grief. Donnie wasn't fleeing it, though. He was moving gently, step by step, through it. He knew deep down that this halt was temporary, even though he didn't feel ready to go back just yet. The valley between two mountaintops was a place of worship. As the days stretched into weeks, a silent war raged inside Donnie McClurkin's heart. Despite the world's persistent prayers, his house was now a peaceful haven. He too had a battlefield, a place where grief met quiet and suffering battled faith. He was perplexed but not angry with God, and the once distant questions were now resonating loudly inside his psyche. "God, why now? Why her? Why take her so abruptly after everything we've gone through and everything she's been through?" For decades, Donnie had preached about trusting God's purpose, even when it was painful, and about his timing. However, that pain was now present inside him, unyielding and raw. One morning, he opened his Bible and gazed at the pages he knew so well. But behind his tears, the words were hazy. Once strengthening verses now seemed far away, like reverberations of a period before the heartache. Even the prayers he offered were unique. They were neither strong nor articulate. They were plain, broken, and silent. There were moments when he said nothing at all. He sat there with his eyes closed and his heart burdened, praying that God could hear what his mouth was unable to say. He sat at the piano in the corner of his living room one evening. He did not play, but his fingers were hovering over the keys. He said in a whisper instead, "I don't know how to worship through this." It dawned on him then that this was the first time he had really been unsure of what to do. His voice, his anointing, his strength, all of it seemed so far. However, something continued to spark deep within. A spark, not a blaze. "Even when you feel empty, God is still full." Charlene used to reassure him. He said, "Even in times of anger, rely on him." Her words returned to her like a soft wind. So he gave it a shot. He prayed once more while kneeling next to his bed, just to make it through the night, not to impress or perform. Even if it came in fragments, he prayed to God for serenity. Even for a few hours, he requested rest. And, even if it came gradually, he pleaded for strength. He did not have a sudden elation or a spectacular vision that night. However, he did experience a sense of quiet, a sort of sacred silence that told him that, despite the suffering, he was not alone. Donnie was aware that the road ahead would still be difficult. The questions remained, and the anguish had not gone away. However, he made a tiny progress toward recovery in the silent conflict between his deity and his anguish. He trusted that God was still there, not because he felt strong. The sky was overcast on the day of the homegoing service. As though the sky were grieving with those assembling to bid farewell, clouds hung over the chapel. People from all around the nation had flown in, members of the church, family, friends, other pastors, and singers. They were all there to pay tribute to Charlene McClurkin, the woman whose grace, fortitude, and unshakable faith had subtly changed the lives of countless people. The last pew in the sanctuary was occupied. The altar was adorned with her favorite flowers, delicate pink roses and white lilies. A soft slideshow was playing in the background. Pictures show Mom smiling over the years, standing tall at church functions, and holding Donnie as a newborn. There were tears, laughter, and quiet moments in the room. There was a profound, heartbreaking love in the air. Johnny, wearing a black suit with a white pocket square, Charlene's favorite color, sat close to the front, surrounded by his family. Like someone who had reconciled with pain but yet carried the burden of it with each breath, his face was serene but frail. This was his first public speech. He would pay tribute to his sister today in the only way he knew how. When it was his turn to perform, the audience fell silent as he spoke via truth, soul, and song. He approached cautiously and touched the piano tenderly. He remained silent for a minute, simply stood there, gasping for air, attempting to summon the courage to speak through his inner turmoil. Then he turned to face the audience and spoke in a tremulous, low voice. My sister Charlene was more than that. She served as my compass, my companion in prayer, and a constant reminder that God is good, even in the worst of circumstances. When I was unable to stand, she carried me, and even when I was unable to see it for myself, Mom continued to believe in what God had put in me. Quiet amens and gentle sniffles filled the room. I never imagined having to perform at her funeral. She always taught me to sing with your heart, even when it's breaking. But I never thought this day would arrive so quickly. I'm not singing for the crowd today. I'm thanking you with a song. Sitting at the piano was Donnie. The opening notes were soft and unsure, akin to a man treading on delicate soil. Then he sang an ancient hymn Charlene adored, his voice rising, unsteady but full of honest emotion. He's looking at the sparrow. Why should I be depressed? The shadows should appear, but why? His voice broke halfway through the song. He stopped, bowing his head, overcome. There was silence in the church. Then, quietly, the audience started humming along with him, supporting him and assisting him in bearing the burden. With tears running down his cheeks, he got back up and gave the song his best effort. There was silence in the room after it was over. The crowd then stood slowly, in silent reverence rather than with a roar of cheers. They weren't merely paying respect to the music. They were paying respect to the suffering, the love, and the life. One of the elders gave Donnie a firm embrace as he stepped down. He sobbed into their arms, his shoulders trembling. He wasn't Pastor Donnie McClurkin at that time, leaning into the arms of those who came to take him in. He was merely a brother mourning his sister. Prayer, recollections, and love marked the conclusion of the service. Because of the beauty she bestowed upon everyone in her vicinity, Charlene's life had been celebrated. And even though Donnie left with a broken heart and puffy eyes, he also took a bit of healing with him, a reminder that God's presence never truly departs, even when we say our final goodbyes. After the homegoing service, weeks went by. The world had resumed its forward motion, the calls had slowed, and the flowers had disappeared. However, Donnie's anguish persisted. Unlike in those early days, it didn't scream. Like a gentle ache in the chest that never quite went away, it now sat silently in the backdrop of everything. But something else had started to develop as a result of that suffering. Clarity. Donnie sat in his study one quiet evening, the same spot where he had prayed, cried, and asked God difficult things. But he wasn't crying tonight. He was contemplating, felt the stirring of something more profound within himself, a message that the stillness had been creating in his heart. He switched on the camera and opened his laptop. He stared into the lens for a moment, uncertain of whether he could say what he wanted to say, but then he spoke quietly and earnestly, not as a performance or a pastor, but just as a guy who had experienced great loss and great love. Hello, family. I needed to be silent for the past 2 weeks. Grief has the ability to humble you and make you realize what really counts. My sister passed away. I became aware of how frequently we think we had more time. It's time to call, to show up, and to forgive. In actuality, though, we don't always have that opportunity. His voice was firm but emotional as he hesitated. I wish I had one more moment with Charlene, that I could hear her laugh again. If you have someone you love, tell them. Don't wait. If there's brokenness between you and someone you once held close, try to make peace. It's not about being perfect. It's about being present. I want you to take this from me. Hold your loved ones close. Say the things you've been keeping back. Life is fragile, and tomorrow is never guaranteed, but what I do have now are the memories, and they matter more than I ever thought. He drew closer to the camera, his tone becoming warmer. He smiled faintly, tears just behind his eyes. And I thank each and every one of you who prayed for me, who reached out, who gave me space. Your love has carried me more than you'll ever know. God has been faithful in my pain. He didn't take it away. He sat with me in it. And that's enough. I'm learning, healing, and slowly standing again. The video concluded quietly, with no music, applause, or special effects, just a man speaking from the bottom of his heart. But the message spread like wildfire, with people sharing it on various platforms, quoting him, thanking him for his vulnerability, and echoing the reminder, hold your loved ones close. And to those who are grieving, I see you. You're not alone. Keep breathing. Keep believing. Light will come again. Donnie McClurkin did what he had always done best in that brief message. He transformed suffering into meaning, and in doing so, he assisted others in navigating their own grief. As the seasons changed from summer to fall, something inside Donnie McClurkin started to change, but the intense pain in his chest persisted. Grief had changed him. There was no doubt of that. He would never be the same man he had been before Charlene's death. But he had come to terms with the fact that it no longer controlled him, that it no longer prevented him from rising in the morning or from smiling when the sun hit the window just so. His hands shook the first time he sat down to play the piano, but this time he didn't hurry. Instead, he let the keys speak to his soul and let the silence between the notes say what words couldn't. He didn't have to be the same, he just needed to be real and keep going. Slowly, gently, he returned to the piano. A few weeks later, Donnie surprised his church by walking in during the morning service without any spotlight or announcement, just him quietly taking his seat. The choir's voices erupted in emotion when they recognized him. The new song that emerged from that silence was not written for performance, but rather for healing. Charlene and himself, people started crying. He was home. When he returned to the stage, he told the story of his sister, the story of faith, the story of loss, and the story of the valley he had traversed. Instead of starting with a song, he didn't speak as if he had it all worked out, but rather as someone who had learned to get back up on his feet, even though he was still bleeding. He told the congregation, I used to think strength meant never breaking, but now I know real strength is trusting God with your broken pieces. His message resonated with thousands of people, and those who had been grieving in private started to open up after being inspired by his candor. Donnie had become a mirror for their suffering and, in turn, a guide for their recovery. Donnie didn't care about charts. To him, it was a tribute, a thank you, a farewell gift to the sister who had been his silent strength all along. His next album, fictitiously titled The Light That Remains, was unlike anything he had ever released before. Critics praised it, and fans referred to it as his most personal work to date. Each song carried the weight of real emotion, not just gospel, but grief, love, and hope. She's still with me, not in the way I want, but in the way I need. I carry her voice in every sermon, every note, every prayer. Time went by and life went on. Donnie continued to minister, to travel, to sing, but now he did so with a different kind of power, one that came not from perfection, but from pain that had been turned into purpose. He frequently mentioned her in interviews, not with tears but with gratitude. His narrative became a living example of how God can deliver you from the deepest depths of life, even with scars that never completely go away. And when he does, you emerge stronger, not because you never broke, but because you made the decision to heal.